Hello, hello. Welcome to the webinar. My name is Lorelei, and you are joining the monthly webinar series hosted by HERdacity. HERdacity is a nonprofit based in Austin, Texas, dedicated to inspiring confidence in women to achieve their career goals, whatever those goals are for you. I am super glad you're able to join us today. On this webinar, we are going to be learning about our inner strengths. And the host for this webinar is a Gallup certified strengths coach and Rodan & Fields team leader who works as a strengths-based coach to guide people to achieve their career and life goals, Miss Amy Zambetti. Hey.
Hey, Lorelei. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm really excited to share with the HERdacity crew and others joining us about strengths. So just make sure we're all in the right place. This is about strengths finders. This is what we're going to talk about a lot over the next 35, 45 minutes. And before I get started, just a couple of housekeeping. I would love if people can grab a piece of paper and a pen or pencil. And if you've completed your StrengthsFinder assessment, be sure to go ahead and grab that report, whether you have the top 5 or the all 34. You can just refer back to that from time to time. So before I jump into the formal presentation, I'd just love to share with you a little bit about my personal story and why I'm so passionate about StrengthsFinders and what it's meant for me and for some of my most meaningful relationships. So there I was in a hotel meeting room having lunch with a bunch of sales leaders with the company I joined just a year earlier. We've been invited there that day to just do some networking to learn from one another. And so the first thing we were asked to do was to stand up and just introduce ourselves. And I looked around the room, I didn't know a soul, but they looked like friendly people that I could definitely hang out with. So I thought easy enough. And as each person stood up and introduced themselves, I felt my nerves kind of ramping up and my palms getting really sweaty. Then when it finally was my turn, I stood up and I had that throat tightening, my eyes kind of welled up. I felt like my face was turning beet red and I just might cry. Well, judging from the eyes on me in that room that day, I think they thought the same thing too. So I stood up, stammered through my introduction as quickly as I could. I sat back down and I thought to myself, what in the heck just happened? Like, who was that? Why was I so insecure? Why was I not feeling confident and excited? And I knew in that moment that despite the relative success that I had had with my business, that if I was going to take it to the next level, I was going to need to do some personal development. I was going to need to get some things figured out. So in my quest for finding just the right thing to help me kind of get back on track and refocus myself and find my voice again, I found StrengthsFinder. It was being offered through a group at my church called Living Your Strengths. And I jumped right into a small group to learn more about what this is all about and what it could do for me. I followed up that small group study with a couple one-on-one coaching sessions with a strengths coach. And after taking some time to really invest in me and look inward, I found that I had great talents lined up for the business that I was in. My learner, my maximizer, my arranger, my discipline, they were all going to help me lead me to the success that I was looking for. And in fact, that's exactly what happened. Over the next 6, 12, 2 years, my business exploded. And what I saw also is that the confidence that I had gained through this experience and the self-awareness that I had developed, really actually the benefits bled into my personal life and some of the most meaningful relationships that I have. And so I'm here today to share this with you all in hopes that you may have the same positive results in your life, that this can benefit your career and your aspirations and maybe even seep into your most meaningful relationships as well. So now what I'd like to do is go ahead and move on to the formal presentation and share with you a bit more about StrengthsFinder and how it can be your competitive advantage. Okay, one moment. All right, here we go. So where did this all begin? This whole StrengthsFinder concept really started back in the 1980s by this gentleman, Don Clifton. And Don Clifton started asking himself a very simple question, and that is, what will happen when we think about what is right with people rather than fixating on what is wrong with them? Now, this may not sound super revolutionary, revolutionary now, but back in the 1980s, it was. We were still trapped in that philosophy of everybody needs to be well-rounded. Everybody needs to be good at everything. You know, don't focus so much on what you're already good at, but spend your time trying to fix your weaknesses. Well, today, we know that's not true. We know that actually everyone's greatest potential for success actually lies in focusing in on what you're naturally talented at and in developing those talents. And that's where you're going to find your competitive advantage. So it all started with Don Clifton, and he did a really smart thing. He actually partnered with George Gallup. In fact, Don Clifton's business bought Gallup, and they formulated together what we now know as StrengthsFinder. Now, it's important to know that StrengthsFinder is based in Gallup data because, of course, any assessment is only as good as the data that it's backed by. And I love that Gallup is the premier global analytics and advice firm that helps so many teams, organizations, and companies around the world to solve their most pressing problems. And because it is a global organization, they have a plethora of data that represents 99% of the entire world population. This is really important because we need to know that as each person takes their assessment, that the results that they get are actually relevant to them and reliable. And when Clifton Strengths is based in Gallup data, you know that you've chosen the right assessment. In fact, over 90% of the Fortune 500 companies also utilize StrengthsFinder in their organizations to do things like balance teams, look for efficiencies and synergies, and just finding the right people in the right roles to deliver the best possible outcome for their company. In fact, over 23 million people around the world to date have actually taken the StrengthsFinder assessment. So, what does all this mean? Well, today we're going to talk about what it means for you. And we're going to discuss what is a talent and how many talent themes are there and how do we organize the talent themes so that they're digestible and they're meaningful and easy to understand. So ultimately, the goal that we want to have is when we know what our talents are, then we take the next step and we look at ways to develop those talents into true differentiating strengths. And that's where your competitive advantage comes into play. One more couple stats I'd love to just share with you before I move along. And that is when you use your strengths, we know that when people use their strengths every day, that they're 3 times more likely to report having an excellent quality of life. And who wouldn't want that, right? Or if you own a company or you're part of a company, research has also shown that those who utilize their strengths every day are 6 times more likely to be engaged at work. What that means is a lot more efficiency and greater outcomes for those companies. One more piece of data that I think is fascinating. 15% of those who use their strengths every day, those who use their strengths every day are 15% less likely to quit their jobs because they're in their roles, they're enjoying what they do, they're using their talents, and that's where they're going to find their greatest amount of job satisfaction. So before we move along, I'd like to invite you all to be a part of a poll. And you'll see in your lower part of your screen, there's a button down there that you can click on to activate a poll. And I'd like to find out how many of our listeners today have taken the StrengthsFinder assessment. And if you have, which of the reports did you choose to pull from that? Did you purchase the top 5 or the all 34 report? Or did your dog eat it? We'll take just a moment if you guys can go ahead and answer a couple of questions. That would be really helpful in the presentation. Okay. Let's see here. Let me just close out of this. Okay, great. Thank you guys for hopping in and casting your information there. We're going to circle back to that. But for now, we're going to jump into, okay, I'm sorry, here we go. We have the poll results. 62% of you have your StrengthsFinder assessment. A couple of you don't know what an assessment is, so we'll circle back to that. And then the bulk of you have your top 5, and another group, about 15%, have your all 34. Okay, that is fantastic. And if your dog did eat your report, you can go back onto the Gallup website. Just go to gallup.com/strengths and log in and access your report at any time. Okay, so what is a talent? Talent, as Gallup defines it, is your naturally occurring pattern of thought, feeling, or behavior that can be productively applied. Okay, it's kind of what you do just naturally. You don't even have to think about it. In fact, it's so natural that you may not even know it's a talent. You'd be like, isn't everybody like that? Doesn't everybody have that same sense or that same ability? And in fact, they don't. And that's your unique ability to do certain things that just isn't natural for anybody else, or for everybody, I should say. So what we're going to do is run through a couple examples to help bring this to light in everyday life. So I'm going to read through a couple statements now, and if it sounds like you, I'm going to ask you to raise your hand, and we'll sort of wrap our heads around how these talents play out. So the first one I want to go over is, are you goal-oriented? Do you have an eye on the future? Are you always looking toward, like, maybe it's the next trip you want to take, or the movie you want to see, or maybe it's the next role you're working towards in your business? If that sounds like you, then please raise your hand, and that you're going to have a little hand that you can raise right there on your screen, right by your name, and just click on that. Well, congratulations. If that sounds like you, then you're gifted with the talent of futuristic. Next, are you able to pick up on the emotions of others easily? Do you just sort of naturally put yourself into their shoes and sense their feelings, and words don't even have to be said? Well, raise your hand if that sounds like you. Congratulations, you are gifted with the talent of empathy. Are you someone who loves to learn new things? Do you plug into podcasts or webinars like today? Do you love to read new books and just feed yourself information all the time? If that sounds like you, then raise your hand. Congratulations, you're gifted with the talent of learner. That's my top talent, by the way. Are you energized by meeting new people? Like, do you walk into a room and you're excited? You weren't like me in that hotel meeting room, but you're actually looking around the room and you're comfortable making conversations and building relationships. And you just know by the end of that event, you're going to have a whole bunch of new friends, and that excites you and fills you up. If that sounds like you, then raise your hand, because you've been gifted with the talent of WOO. Now, WOO is the one acronym that we do use for our talents, and WOO is WOO, and it stands for winning others over. Next, the last one. Do you recognize the uniqueness in others? You're jazzed up to meet somebody new and kind of understand how they tick and what they're excited about and what their interests are. And they may be so different from you, but that's really neat. That's exciting for you to learn and to get to know that person better. If that sounds like you, then raise your hand. Congratulations, you are gifted with the talent of individualization. Okay, so there are 34 different talents. This is what they've identified. There's 34 different talent themes. And those themes, we call them themes because they can play out a little bit differently. For example, if you have a communication talent, well, maybe you're a really strong speaker, or maybe you're a really great writer. It can look different for different people. So when you see talent themes, this is why it's not just a talent, because there are different ways that it can manifest for each of us. Okay, so let's move on to your uniqueness, because our uniqueness is in the mix of how our talents sort of rise to the top. And for those of you who have your top 5 report, this is what you're focusing on explicitly, is what's right at the top. These are the talents that you access most naturally, most easily, and most frequently. And they're the ones you're going to want to focus on developing. And we'll talk a little bit further about what I mean by that. So the top 5 are called your signature themes. Now, what's fascinating about this is if you think about, well, there's just 5 words, right? Like how different could that be from somebody else if there's just 34 talents? Well, interestingly enough, really unique. In fact, if you were to try to find another person who had your exact same top 5 talents in the same order, you might have to go through 33.4 million people to find someone who has your same top 5 talents in the same order. What I love about this is there are 34 talents. It's not a huge number, but it's enough that allows us to get a really unique report on you. It's not a broad stroke. We don't assign just a number, and we don't use code language for what it means. You don't have to know sort of StrengthsFinder speak, because the talents are words that we all know and can understand pretty quickly. Things like competition, focus, discipline, empathy, developer. It's pretty plain, simple language. And I love that for that reason, it's easy to implement it either in your office, on your team, within your family, or even within your friend circle. Now, for those of you who have the All 34 report, to help you sort of understand what this means, is the top 10 we like to call your dominant talent themes. So these are ones that you're going to use most frequently, most naturally, and they can even move around a little bit within those top 10, 12, 13 talents. Maybe number 8 could go to number 4, or number 5 could go number 9. But you're not going to see the top dominant talents fall down to the very, very bottom. Okay, so then the next group, the sort of middle third, is maybe between 12, 13, 14, somewhere in there into the low 20s. And this is what we call our non-dominant talents. They're there, they're present, they're accessible, but it's not where we stand the greatest potential for improvement or for success. But not a bad place to start. And if you do need to sort of tap into those, they're there and you're going to be comfortable utilizing them. Now, the bottom are what we call our lesser talents. We don't really like to use the word weakness. In fact, Gallup defines weakness as something that gets in the way of you using your talents and your strengths. But the lower part, now if you have to access these, so for example, woo for me is very, very low. So going into that room with a bunch of strangers, I'm not as comfortable doing that. I can, but I won't do it as well as somebody who's talented in that talent theme of woo. So the best thing you can do for those talents down there is, if you're in a work environment and you're on a team, you're going to want to balance that team by finding people who their top talents are your bottom ones, and just communicate that within your group, and so everybody can kind of share where they stand, and that way you're going to put together the most well-rounded team, just aligning all the strengths as best you can. Because what we believe is that people are not meant to be well-rounded, but teams can be. Okay, so we're going to go do a quick exercise here. This is very rudimentary and simple, but I want you to grab that pen and paper that I asked for you to have at the beginning. And I want you to put the pen in the hand that you normally write with. I want you to write your name 2 or 3 times with the hand that you normally write with. Okay. Next, I want you to write your name with the hand that you don't normally write with. Just write it 2 or 3 times on that same sheet of paper. Now, I can't see you or talk to you, but I can assume pretty confidently that when you wrote your name with the hand you normally write with, you knew how to hold the pencil, you knew how to shape the letters, you could even do it blindfolded. In fact, I'd be willing to bet that the way you wrote your name was consistently pretty similar, right? The same consistent type outcome. On the other hand, literally, when you wrote with your non-dominant hand, I would bet that you had to think about how to hold the pen, how to shape those letters. It felt awkward and uncomfortable. In fact, your name probably looks a little bit different each time you try to write it, because you're sort of figuring it out as you went along. That's a really simple way to recognize when you're in flow, when you're using your talents, when you're doing things that are just come very naturally to you, and when they don't. Okay, now this is a really neat example that will also shed light on our talents. And this one centers around the communication talent. So back in the late 1950s, Evelyn Wood did a study that centered around speed reading. And she wanted to see what would happen if they took a group of high school students and they put them all through a speed reading course, and how would they improve? What would that look like for all these students? And what could they expect? What were the possible outcomes? So when they did their baseline study, they found that the poor readers were reading at about 90 words per minute. And the good readers were reading at about 350 words per minute. So what would happen with a speed reading course? How much better could the poor readers get? And really, what could we expect of the good readers? Because they were already pretty good anyway, right? Well, what they found is when they put all the students through the same speed reading course and they practiced and they studied and they did all the right things to try to improve their speed reading, interestingly, the poor readers were able to almost double their words per minute, 150 words per minute. It's pretty good. I think if you ask anybody, if you're able to double what you're able to do by taking a course, it's certainly worth your time. So then you look at the good readers, and they're already at 350 words per minute. So what could we expect of them? I mean, how much better could they get? They were already good, right? They almost 10x'd their words per minute, 2,900 words per minute. This is what is possible when you find a talent that you're already better than your peers at, and then you invest in that talent. You can expect to have extraordinary outcomes. This is what we call developing a strength. This is when you take a talent that you've identified through the StrengthsFinder assessment, then you add some skills and knowledge to that, you invest in that, you're able to develop a strength. It's the ability to consistently produce a positive outcome with near perfect performance again and again. You start with talent and finish with strength. It's as simple as that. This is what we call our superpower equation. So this is where you can differentiate yourself. This is where you can really lean into your God-given talents and develop those in ways that will set you apart from the competition. Not only that, but this is where you stand to have the most just enjoyment. It feels good to do things well that we're uniquely designed to do well, right? It builds confidence when we find success in things. And when you find that success again and again and again, that's where your confidence grows. And the self-awareness partnered with that confidence is just a winning combination. So your unique talents will lead you to your superpowers. Okay, this all sounds great in theory, right? But how does it really play out in real life? Well, I'm going to share this with you. And the first example that I'd like to share with you are personal relationships. This is the part that surprised me, honestly. I didn't realize that StrengthsFinder that I had originally gravitated towards for business to help me be more successful in my role and finding ways to do my job better and to better coach and to better lead would actually carry over into my personal life. So the first example I want to share with you involves my husband, Kirk, and we've been married for 28 years. And you would think after 28 years that we knew everything that there was to know about one another, right? And so a couple of years ago, he decided to take his StrengthsFinder assessment. He did all 34 report. And it was a light bulb moment for us to get his results. And here's why. So Kirk had a funny habit of sending me links that would lead to websites for dogs that were really cute, but I knew that we would never adopt, or a beautiful home in a really great town that I knew we would never buy. Maybe it's a great vacation we should take one day, but that day wasn't today. And so he would send these to me in my inbox. And at first I would start watching them and seeing what it was all about. But then my interest sort of waned and I realized that it was pointless to me. Like this was never going to materialize. So he would come home after work and he would ask me, what did you think about the puppy that I sent? Or what did you think about the house that I sent? And I'm like, honey, I mean, you must not be very busy at work because I don't have time to be looking at all these things. And so he was a little bummed out, honestly. And so he was a little frustrated. Well, when he took his assessment and in his top 5, we saw that futuristic was his number 3. That's when the light bulb went off. And I realized that what he was doing and what he was sharing with me was just his God-given talent. Because as we talked about earlier, when you're in futuristic, that means that your eye is always towards the future, that you're very goal-oriented. And what he was trying to do those days that he was sending me all these different links was he was pulling me along with him. And so, wow, I really should have given him more respect for that, right? And it really just enhanced our relationship, and I gave him more grace when he did that sort of thing. And he also realized that futuristic really wasn't, my top talent. And so he would kind of move on from there. Okay, let's talk about your jobs and careers and how this might be of interest to you. So job reviews. Um, an example that comes to mind is a client named James that I've worked with. And he's a younger gentleman in the workforce. And he always felt uncomfortable in job reviews because he just wasn't quite sure what to say. Didn't quite have the language. He felt like he might have been bragging if he said he was doing things well and what have you. And so he found out his top 5. And the number 1 that he had in his top talents was responsibility. Well, James is in project management. And so responsibility talent allows one to really take ownership of what they're doing. They're going to see that project through. They're going to make sure that nothing falls through the cracks. They're going to follow up, and they're going to own the results at the end. So now he had some framework and some language to be able to use with his boss and to walk through those reviews and feel comfortable and confident doing it because he knew that that's how he was created. These were his God-given talents at play at work, and the company would really benefit from that. So the job search, there's a couple different ways we can look at this. Number 1, your resume. You absolutely want to have your top 5 talents on your resume. As I shared with you earlier, 90% of all Fortune 500 companies utilize StrengthsFinder in their organization. So it's going to be attractive to them, if you happen to be applying with one of those, that you already come to that opportunity understanding what StrengthsFinder means. You understand the value that you bring through that lens, and you're a natural fit for their organization, right? So another way to look at this is putting it on your LinkedIn profile. That's really easy to do. And as we know, when anybody's looking to hire somebody, that they are always going to look at your social media. LinkedIn, probably the first place they're going to go. So when they see that you're a candidate for a position and that you are already knowing what your talents are and that you have the self-motivation to utilize something like StrengthsFinder that's so known around the world, and there you have it on display, they know what your talents are. They can already start putting the pieces of the puzzle together to figuring out if you're a fit or not for their organization. And then lastly, interviews. A great example that comes to mind for the interview is a client named Donna that I worked with. She had a long job search going on. She was kind of frustrated, had a lot of opportunities that had not come to fruition for her. So we sat down and we talked about her talents and how they manifested in her life and what she really enjoyed doing, what she was passionate about. The next interview that she went on, wouldn't you know that the company she was interviewing with had a StrengthsFinder culture already established. And when they saw that she already knew her talents, that she believed in the value of StrengthsFinder and what this information meant, it was like Cinderella in the glass slipper. It just fit. She got that dream job. She's still there today, and she's incredibly happy. So knowing our talents allows you to make really sound strategic choices for yourself in terms of your career. You're going to know if it's a fit for you or not when you read through your responsibilities for that role and how your talents align or don't align. And therein lies just really solid strategy. So next steps that I would recommend, most of you on this call have already taken the StrengthsFinder assessment. If you haven't, you definitely want to. You can purchase the book that I showed you. You can get this on Amazon. You can take that assessment and decide if you want to get the all 34 report or if you want to just get the top 5. And then take the results that you have, log into the account. They have all kinds of reports there that you can utilize: the signature themes report, the theme sequence report, the all 34 report. There's PDFs and everything right there at your fingertips. And so really absorb that information and go through the process of seeing your talents and how they play out and how you're already using them, and then thinking of ways that you could invest in those talents in ways that would benefit your job or your life. So that's a process we call name, claim. And the final piece to that is aiming those talents and really getting strategic around your next steps and where you want to go and what you're going to do with those. For some people, you're just a self-starter, and that's something you're going to naturally do, and you can just do that on your own. On the other hand, it's been my experience that a lot of people they want somebody to come along with them. They might want to join into a small group that can work together to go through a process together of really aiming those talents and utilizing that newfound self-awareness. Or finally, some one-on-one coaching. That could just be the right springboard for you to move on to the next step and to make a great pivot in your life. The final example I'll share with you around that is about a client named Stacy. Stacy came to me as a busy mom of 3 kids, married, pretty full life, pretty full plate. She had a small jewelry business on the side that she really enjoyed. But in recent years, she had actually been diagnosed with cancer, and she had gone through quite a battle with that and was, fighting her way back through that to regain her health. And fortunately she did. And she's incredibly healthy and grateful to have come through that. But that left with her sort of a yearning to help other people who are going through the same sort of battles. And so through our relationship, we identified what her top talents were and how they so well aligned with helping others getting through a process like that, and for her to just naturally become a counselor for people. So she's now re-enrolled in school. She's gone back to get her counseling degree, and she will tell you that she feels like she is finally on the right path to find her real passionate purpose in this life. Okay, so now it's time for some question and answer. And there we go, Lorelei.
Hi, Amy. Thank you so much. That was lovely. I want to share actually with the audience my experience with StrengthsFinder. So my team at HERdacity, we went and took the StrengthsFinder assessment in advance of this webinar. And we were so amazed to figure out the things that we had noticed before, like what we had considered our strengths and our weaknesses. We were seeing how those inner strengths were aligning and kind of misaligning with our partners.
Interesting.
It was so incredible to see, like, the things that we thought were unique to ourselves or were challenging with other people. We were able to refocus in on how those were their innate talents and how much they were able to contribute to our organization with those fascinating talents. So it was really cool to be able to see the different strengths that we could start leaning on and leaning towards in our colleagues, and the things that we can start embracing in our own selves, which was, it was very empowering.
That's wonderful.
Yes. So for all of y'all who have questions for Amy, send them in through the Q&A feature at the bottom or the chat feature, and we will ask Amy all your questions. So Amy, the first question is, what should you do if you think your dream career might not match with your top strengths?
Well, I would ask you, go through a little bit of a soul searching of, what is it about that dream career that is really attracting you? And then also maybe really diving into the talents, and because there can be, as I mentioned, some different ways that talents can manifest, and you can come to like a different outcome utilizing different talents, if that makes any sense. So it'd be helpful to have an example of what they're talking about, because it's just, kind of out there. But for example, like for me, as I mentioned, woo is really low for me, but oftentimes in what I do, I have to get in front of a group of people and speak to them and put myself in what would normally be a very awkward situation. So in order to overcome that, because I don't have a really strong talent of woo, then I'll come at that through empathy, which is higher for me. And so I want to help these people. And so I can kind of overcome the awkwardness or the nervousness, knowing that I'm there to help them, and that it'll bring me like more security, knowing that I'm doing something good for them, even though it might be a little bit more challenging for me.
Okay. So to dovetail off of that, do you think we should lean into careers that might better match with our top 5 strengths?
I do. I mean, if you're in an ideal world, you would have a career where you're looking at your talents and you're able to utilize those on a regular basis. Now, I guess the first question is, do you like your job? Like, are you happy? Are you excited every day to go to work? Because, you know, if you are, then you're probably utilizing some talents in maybe ways that you don't recognize. On the flip side of that, you know, I think unfortunately a lot of people get into careers that maybe somebody suggested they should do because it just made sense, it was practical, but it's not really what they love to do. And maybe it's time to consider a pivot. Or I worked with a young lady the other week where she used some of her talents, but she didn't have an outlet for all of those at the top. And so then we talked about, well, what can you do outside of your job? Are there some extracurricular groups you can get involved with or volunteering so that you can kind of fuel that side of you? Because that's what you want to figure out is like, how can I move through my day doing things that feed me and don't deplete me?
Nice.
So,
do our top 5 strengths change over time?
That's a really good question. So your top 5 talents are what you're born with, and just doing a little differentiation between talents and strengths, because sometimes they get used interchangeably. And just for the sake of StrengthsFinder, we think of talents as being what we're born with. They are our innate talents. And no, in fact, they're not going to change much over time. They can kind of adjust maybe up and down the top dozen or so. And the time that we're most likely to see a big change might be if there's a serious life event, divorce, death, you know, something that really kind of shakes us to our core, because we can sort of refocus, but the talents that we have are really, they're not going to change a lot, which is great, because if they were changing all the time, you wouldn't know where to focus your energy.
Okay. So on that note, if they change just a little bit over time, how often would you recommend we take the StrengthsFinder assessment?
Yes. So it's interesting. Some people I've come into contact with have taken it more than once, 2, 3 times, and think of it like it's this fun quiz. Honestly, I recommend only taking it once. I think it can be confusing to take it more than once. I think if you realize that there's going to be a little bit of movement, so don't get too hung up in, for example, if you only know your top 5 results, don't think that, oh, number one's like always the number one and you know, the most active, the strongest for me. There can be, you know, depending on what you're doing, you might really be pulling in 2 or 4 or 6, but really that top 10 or 12 are what you want to focus on. And for that reason, I think it's important to get the all 34 report, because if you just get the top 5 and you get another top 5, there might be a little bit of a difference, but what you don't realize is that the talent that's not in the second top 5 report might be number 6 or 7 or 8. So it's misleading.
Okay. So we have a question here that I can totally relate to. So they said when they took the test, they found some of the questions particularly difficult to answer, like wanting to answer on both ends of the spectrum, but not, you know, feeling that one was stronger than the other. So they would choose neutral because they saw them as a spectrum in relation to each other. And they didn't want to go like have to pick one over the other because it didn't feel right.
Right.
So should we worry about the accuracy of our results when I imagine many of us had the same experience where we wanted to go one and the other, so we picked neutral?
Yeah, and that's a bit of advice I always give to people when they take the assessment, is to really try not to go too neutral too often. It's going to happen, but what happens when you're taking that StrengthsFinder assessment, which for anybody who hasn't taken it is 177 questions, and as you answer those questions, you start going down your own like personal rabbit hole, and the questions start being tailored to you. And I love that it becomes so unique. And I think probably the further down you go, you know, it gets even harder to choose because it's just a little bit different, you know, one side or the other. So ideally, you won't answer neutrally too many times, and really try to choose one or the other. And for that reason, it's timed, as you know, because we want your gut reaction. We don't want you to overthink it. And that's actually another good reason why not to take it more than once, because sometimes we have something called woo, or have talent envy, and we might try to skew our answers so that certain talents appear for us. So for example, I'd love to have woo. That would be awesome. It's so low for me. If I were to go take it again, I might try to like figure out a way so I can say, I have woo, when I really don't. So you don't want to try to outsmart it, and you do want to try to answer one end or the other and not go too neutral too often.
So on the point of only taking it maybe once or twice in your lifetime, I guess, is
Yeah.
there an ideal age to take this test? Because we have a question about maybe teenagers taking it. What do you think?
100%. Yes. So it's one of these things that honestly, anybody between the age of, 15, I would say is the youngest you'd want to take it. And then on up to, any age, really enjoys seeing this information for themselves. But StrengthsFinder can be an excellent tool to use for kids who are getting ready to go to college and they're writing the dreaded college essays. This will give them some framework, some language to use when they're trying to sell themselves to their favorite university. Let me tell you what, if a college sees that you know your talents through StrengthsFinders and you built your essay around that, that's going to be a differentiator. Same thing for kids who are in college and they're applying for their first jobs, as we talked about with interviews and resumes and stuff. So I would say as young as 15 would be a great place to start. Freshman in high school.
Wow, okay. An attending wants to know if there is a way to approach credentialing our strengths. If there's a way to be more competitive in the job market in regards to accurately representing these strengths with some sort of education-backed credential.
That's a cool way to look at it. It's a great question. And I think what I would do in that case is when you look at your talents and as you're developing those into strengths, what are some of those programs you might be plugging into? There may be some certifications that go along with that dovetail with those talents as you're developing them. Maybe if you're developing your communication talent and you're going to enroll in a program that's going to help you be a better public speaker, that might be a way to get a credential for that. As far as coming from Gallup, they don't offer that at this point. But I think looking at more of like third-party certifications would come in play as you develop that strength.
Excellent, excellent. Okay. In regards to our top 5, Amy, do you want to share yours?
My top 5?
Yes.
Oh, good. I'm so glad you asked. Learner, discipline, maximizer, arranger, and relator. So when I found out my top 5 initially, when I was talking about several years ago, as it was building my business, a maximizer is somebody who likes to help people or processes go from good to great. So they become sort of natural coaches because you're trying to help that person, right, develop their potential. Another one, the relator, really resonated as well because being in small groups and having deep, meaningful conversations, that fuels me. I love it. It's kind of the opposite to the woo. So it's fascinating. And the learner, it's been such a learning experience. If you're drawn to come to a webinar like this or a podcast, I'd be willing to bet that learner is somewhere in your top 5 or at least top 10.
Can you give us another example of how one of your strengths interacts positively with your role as a StrengthsFinder coach?
Sure. Let's see. Well, I mean, discipline would be one. Discipline is somebody who likes routine and predictability and making things happen. And so like when I work with a client, I have a very organized process that we're going to go through, and I'm going to lead them through to, to their end goal, reaching their end goals. And I'm not really a fly by night kind of person. I have to have that discipline and that process in place. Another one that's interesting is my arranger. And arrangers are able to kind of juggle a lot of things. They're multitaskers and jugglers. And we've moved 12 times, both domestically and internationally, kind of all over the globe. And it's no wonder that I kind of got this weird sense of joy or fun out of that, because I mean, my arranger was on like overdrive every time we would relocate as a family. So it explains a lot.
I agree. I have a ranger in my top 5 and I have the same feeling.
I agree. I mean, I love saying your top 5 and like your activator being number 1 and what you do in your role. It's no wonder making things happen left and right.
Right. Yeah. After my colleagues found out, they were like, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Isn't that neat though? And I think there's a level of, maybe a little extra respect, like, oh, Lorelei can do that. Like she's going to get stuff done. She's got her activator that she's going to lean into and make things happen.
All right. So on that note, like knowing that we have these strengths, these talents, are any of these talents possibly learned by like socialization? Like, do we pick up these talents perhaps from our parents or our siblings? Is that possible?
Well, I think they can be reinforced, is what I would say. Something that's learned is really more of a skill. You know, that's where we'd add like the skills or knowledge or things like that. Talents are just something you're just kind of born with it. Like you don't know why you do it, but you do it and you don't feel good not doing it. For example, a gal that I work with, her includer is really high for her. And she's always like pulling people in and she just feels terrible not doing it. I don't think anybody taught her to be that way. It's just kind of how she naturally comes to things. And it's just like, oh, come join us, come join us. I think we all know that type of person that loves to include. So talents, no, I think they can be honed, but it's not something you necessarily are taught to be.
Excellent. Okay.
Yeah.
So in our top 5, let's see, how do I suggest this? Now, I know that the strengths are broken out into 4 categories.
Yes.
Can you talk to us a little bit about those categories real quick?
I would love to. I just didn't know how meaty we could make this. So I'm glad you brought it up. These are called the domains.
Okay.
So the 34 talents are all going to fall into one of 4 domains. The domains are executing, strategic thinking, relationship building, and influencing. And particularly when you're looking at balancing teams, this is where the domains are going to come into play, because you're going to want to have somebody, or depending on the size of the group, let's say there's 4 people in the group, ideally each one of those 4 people would lead with that particular domain. And they know they lead with that if a couple of their top talents fall into that. So some people might be like a rainbow, like I'm a rainbow and 2 of my top 5 fall into the executing domain. So I lead with executing, but I have those other pieces, the relationship building, the influencing, and the strategic thinking. Other people, they might be 100% executing. I mean, they just get it done. But it is interesting to see, as you're in a corporate environment, as you are, and applying this within HERdacity, where, you know, who leads with what domain, and making sure that groups are well represented within all 4 of them.
Should we be concerned if our top 5 or our top 10 appear out of balance to us?
No, because as we said, you know, people aren't supposed to be well-rounded. Like it is what it is. You can't get too caught up in all of that. I think the power comes in the self-awareness. So for example, and I know somebody who's executing themes are like all on the bottom, right? So it doesn't mean he can't get stuff done. It just means when he's dragging his feet and he's not getting stuff done, that's why. And he needs to kind of gear up and know that that's not something that's coming naturally to him, and he's got to push through. So it's not like you can't cop out just because you don't have a lot of executing. It just means you realize why maybe it's not coming as easily to you, and you need to, there's certain obligations that you have that require you to get stuff done. Just work a little harder and get it done.
And lastly, just repeat those domains for us one more time.
Yes, the 4 domains are executing, strategic thinking, influencing, and relationship building.
Excellent.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much. This has been so insightful. I feel like we've gained a lot of knowledge about ourselves, and hopefully we'll be able to take this information into our work environments and lean into our natural, glorious strengths, which we all have.
Absolutely.
So I want to encourage all of y'all to connect with Amy. Her information's on the screen. Feel free to connect with her on LinkedIn, send her an email. She is incredibly wonderful to visit with, and has so much engaging information. You would love to visit with her.
Thank you, Lorelei, for the opportunity.
Oh, it was my pleasure to have you, Amy.
It's
Thank you all for joining us today. It has been our pleasure.